Despite Bitcoin existing for more than a decade, changes to Bitcoin's core code, whilst infrequent and relatively minor, continue to happen as soft forks. Whilst the rules of Bitcoin remain hard-coded, such as Bitcoin supply and issuance rate, not even Satoshi Nakamoto, as revolutionary and innovative as he was, could foresee all the ways in which Bitcoin could be improved marginally over time. As Bitcoin is decentralized, reaching network consensus for changes or improvements is not so straightforward. How does change in Bitcoin happen when there is no one leader in charge which enforces rules above all others? Bitcoin is not a company or entity which has a head office residing in any one geographical location. Its committed group of core developers and miners are spread out all over the globe and contribute freely to Bitcoin as an open-source project. Reaching network consensus of a software-related change in Bitcoin is typically a long and arduous process. Once an idea is proposed and reviewed, the code must then be written, tested and reviewed, with the eventual change thereafter needing to released in a way which keeps the network operational. Any node, miner or developer on the Bitcoin network must usually be incentivized to agree to changes or believe that any changes should benefit Bitcoin directly. Thus, getting the network to reach consensus on even a minor change is not so simple. Upgrading any aspect of Bitcoin whilst payments and transactions are being processed in blocks approximately every 10 minutes is akin to upgrading a 747 plane in flight. In contrast to other cryptocurrencies which move at a rapid pace and even hard fork occasionally, Bitcoin, on the other hand, improves gradually. This is purposefully done to some extent to remain as faithful as it can to its core design. A network that remains secure, scalable, and valuable, both from a monetary and technical standpoint, is something that must be maintained for Bitcoin at all costs. A lot of the security behind Bitcoin is established using digital signatures and private public key cryptography. Bitcoin currently utilizes ECDSA, elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, with Koblitz SECP 256K1 parameters. ECDSA is a digital signature algorithm over an elliptic curve group that utilizes SECP 256K1, VEEK standing for Koblitz, which originally came from a standard for efficient cryptography titled SEC2, Recommended Elliptic Curve Domain Parameters. So why did the creator of Bitcoin choose ECDSA and the SECP 256K1 elliptic curve for Bitcoin? There is not an exact answer, since most of what Satoshi had to say can only be inferred from his online posts in forums. Whilst Satoshi was not necessarily a cryptographer, he did realize that digital signatures were integral in forming the backbone of security on the Bitcoin network. One reason ECDSA was likely chosen was it had been standardized by committees such as ISO, ANSI, IEE, and FIPS. The benefit of ECDSA is that it provides the shortest signatures and public keys for a given security level. According to one Bitcoin developer, Laszlo Hanyecz, whose name you might have heard of as the guy involved with the first ever recorded Bitcoin transaction, 2 pizzas, who worked on the project in its foundational years, said that Satoshi sought help from people who were more well-versed in cryptography than himself. According to Hanyecz, Satoshi communicated to him that, "I had a bunch of people look at it, and they told me this was good." And he didn't really elaborate on it, but he said he had experts look at it. Ex-chief scientist of the Bitcoin Foundation, Gavin Andresen, in his paper titled "What Satoshi Did Not Know," conceded that it was unlikely that Satoshi was a cryptographer whom was up to date with the latest cryptography research. When later asked on a Reddit AMA whether there was one thing he could change about Bitcoin, Andresen replied, "Implement Schnorr signatures instead of ECDSA." The longer Satoshi was no longer involved in Bitcoin, stepping away from the project and community upon Bitcoin Core's release in November 2010, the more the responsibility fell onto the open source community to improve and upgrade Bitcoin. One of the things we do know about Schnorr signatures and how it could have impacted Satoshi's choice at the time of creating Bitcoin was that Schnorr signatures had a patent which didn't expire until 2008. Schnorr was also not standardized and was not a common signature scheme in crypto libraries. Because of the patent on Schnorr signatures, it meant it never crossed its way into practical applications. The Schnorr signature was invented by Klaus-Peter Schnorr in 1990. Schnorr signatures produce a digital signature as a result of the Schnorr signature algorithm. Schnorr is similar to ECDSA, but provides a lot of benefits which ECDSA does not. Schnorr signatures, in the context of integrating it into Bitcoin, could perhaps be traced back to around 2013. In a cypherpunks mailing list, Adam Back, who was an early pioneer of digital asset research and the inventor of Hashcash, would debate the merits of the digital signatures ECDSA against Schnorr. Back wrote, "Personally, I prefer EC Schnorr because Schnorr is just a better, simpler, more secure and more flexible signature. Supports simple, blinding, compact multi-sig, clearer security proofs, better security margin, less dependence on hash properties, etc. To my mind, DSA's only reason for existence is historic due to patents. It is inferior by all metrics to Schnorr, just that Schnorr's patent didn't expire until February of 2008. The origins of Taproot. So why is it called Taproot? The definition by Wikipedia defines Taproot as a large, central and dominant root from which other roots sprout laterally. As noted in the Bitcoin Ops newsletter, it's an unusual name attributed to a software upgrade. As Greg Maxwell had come up with the name, he explained, "The name originated in a visualization of a tree with a thick central trunk like a dandelion taproot. The technique is mostly useful because of the assumption that there is one high probability path and the rest is fuzzy stragglers. And I thought it was a good one because of the punny fact that it verifies script path spends by tapping into the hidden commitment in the root." The initial idea of integrating Schnorr as a signature scheme were conversations amongst only core Bitcoin developers. As far as active implementations of Schnorr signatures were concerned, none had been implemented anywhere near the size and scale of Bitcoin. As Bitcoin was still in its earliest days of existence, the arguments over which were the better digital signature schemes were only had in the recesses of the community that few were knowledgeable enough to answer. In the years that followed, the conversations around Schnorr signatures were slowly fermenting into some key ideas, which would reveal themselves some 4 years later. The idea for Taproot originally came from a conversation between Andrew Polstra, Greg Maxwell, and Peter Willer at a diner in Mountain View, California. To quote Polstra, "We realized that we could use this way of transforming a key into a hash as a mechanism for a new style of Bitcoin output. A lot of cool ideas we had been talking about for years suddenly seemed to fit together." In November 2017, Maxwell departed Blockstream. As co-founder and CTO of Blockstream, Maxwell decided to pursue open source development for Bitcoin. This next step in Maxwell's career was now focused on developing and working on Bitcoin improvements. One important omission from the Bitcoin protocol was, of course, Schnorr signatures. In a departing email dated the 19th of January 2018, Maxwell explained his leaving of Blockstream. "Back when we founded the company, Blockstream, I was concerned that there was significant underinvestment in Bitcoin technology. Bitcoin had a healthy technical community just as it does today, but lacked the kind of industry support that projects like Linux have. Without sustained financial support, some kinds of bigger projects seemed really hard to pull off with developers needing to share time between non-Bitcoin employment, their families, and their other interests. For the most part, back then, early Bitcoin companies weren't investing in public technology, at least not effectively." Maxwell further added, "So, for me, this means that I can go back to working on the things I find most exciting, without the overhead of managing staff or dealing with the many non-Bitcoin blockchain applications which are important to Blockstream's business." The maturing Bitcoin industry means I don't need to worry that Bitcoin development could be left with inadequate financial support. A day earlier, on the 18th of January 2018, a paper titled Simple Schnorr Multi-Signatures with Applications to Bitcoin, along with core developers Andrew Polstra, Yannick Surin, and Peter Wuille, was submitted. In a Blockstream post dated the 23rd of January 2018, Wuille explained what the published paper was about. He spoke about the idea of MUSIG, which in his words was a simple multi-signature scheme that supported key aggregation and security for the plain public key model. The paper, explained Wuille, is about cryptographic properties of MUSIG and aren't directly a proposal for Bitcoin. As CoinDesk reported, over the years of developing the paper, Wuille and the team dealt with numerous setbacks. Wuille and the developers found what he described as a rogue attack in their Schnorr implementation, leading them to submit a paper addressing the issue. This paper was actually rejected by an academic board that received it, who gave them a different paper that had already resolved the attack in a better way. To quote CoinDesk, this was how ANSI cryptographer Surin became involved with the Bitcoin developers. I noticed that the specific signature aggregation scheme they were thinking of didn't have a proper security analysis at the time, he said. As provable security is my specific research area, and I previously worked on Schnorr signatures, I contacted Peter Wuille. Wuille then sent Surin the paper, and together with Bitcoin Core contributor Maxwell and Blockstream mathematician Andrew Polstra, wrote a more secure implementation. Another setback was an attack vector discovered by Blockstream engineer Russell O'Connor. Wuille dubbed it Russell's attack, who discovered that for multi-party schemes, a party could claim ownership of someone else's private key and therefore spend the other outputs. 3 out of the 4 authors of the paper were involved in Blockstream alongside Back to some degree either currently or in the past. Maxwell as co-founder and CTO, Polstra as director of research, and Wuille as co-founder and core tech engineer. Back is also the current CEO of Blockstream. Most importantly, the proposal ensured the same security as Bitcoin's current multisig, ECDSA, but offered to reduce the amount of transaction data required down to a single normal-looking public key and signature. The team described a new Schnorr-based multi-signature scheme, a protocol which allows a group of signers to produce a short joint signature on a common message called MUSIG. At the time, the MUSIG protocol was probably the best studied aggregation protocol in the context of Bitcoin. Speaking to CoinDesk, both proposals, according to Maxwell, make smart contracts easier to implement, more fee-efficient, and more private, he said. Taproot and Graftroot improve the back-end technology for these advanced applications, and by doing so, will contribute to making them more accessible to people. Taproot not only looked to reduce overheads and costs, but also increase privacy by making basic multi-sig transactions look identical to a single sig transaction. Maxwell further stated that Taproot would implement a powerful optimization for Merkleized alternative script trees, MAST. Further advantages of Schnorr would support batch validation. This would mean verifying the keys all at once without verifying them individually. In addition, Schnorr is provably non-malleable, meaning it has a security property that is not true for ECDSA. Simply by virtue of introducing a new signature scheme, we get a number of advantages for free. One of them, ECDSA uses DER encoding, which adds 6 bytes of completely unnecessary data to the chain for every signature. This can be removed once a different signature scheme is used. As a result of the Schnorr changes, a versioning up of SegWit, version 1, would be utilized. A new OP code can be added to the scripting which is possible since SegWit exists. Through Taproot, one can encode a public key or a hash of a script inside just one public key that goes on the chain. No one on the network looking at the transaction or the key can deduce if it is a regular key or a key that commits to a script. Just as MUSIG allows basic multisig to look like single sig, Taproot allows even the most complex possible Bitcoin scripts to look like single sig if its participants cooperate with each other. But if they don't, they still receive the full security of their chosen script. This provides an even larger set of users with reduced overhead, reduced costs, and increased privacy. On July 6, 2018, Vuila then submitted a post to the Bitcoin Dev mailing list with the submission of a draft specification for a Schnorr-based signature format. As Vuila wrote, "Here is a proposed BIP for 64-byte elliptic curve Schnorr signatures, over the same curve as is currently used in ECDSA. It is simply a draft specification of the signature scheme itself. It does not concern consensus rules, aggregation, or any other integration into Bitcoin. Those things are left for other proposals, which can refer to this scheme if desirable. Standardizing the signature scheme is a first step towards that, and as it may be useful in other contexts to have a common Schnorr scheme available, it is its own informational BIP. If accepted, will work on more production-ready reference implementations and tests. This is joint work with several people listed in the document. The initial idea had been proposed, but the order in which the release features are packaged, what they would include, what developers would work on it, was yet to be determined. It was assumed at this stage that the set of changes including Schnorr signatures and scripting would collectively be released under a joint Taproot upgrade. Taproot's integration into Bitcoin. Before any Bitcoin change gets designed, written and tested, a proposed BIP is released. A BIP stands for Bitcoin Improvement Proposal and is a high-level design document for new features and changes in Bitcoin. The BIP is the standard and most accepted way within the community for communicating new ideas. All of Bitcoin's changes which address improvements and optimizations, but not issues or bugs, go through the submission of a BIP first. On May 6, 2019, Vuila would upload 2 BIP drafts to the Bitcoin Dev mailing list for a proposed Taproot soft fork. These 2 BIPs were the following: BIP Taproot, BIP TapScript. The Taproot proposal would include a number of ideas which made its way to this first draft release, these being Taproot to make all outputs and cooperative spends indistinguishable from each other, Merkle branches to hide the unexecuted branches and scripts, Schnorr signatures enable wallet software to use key aggregation thresholds within one input, improvements to the signature hashing algorithm, replacing OP check multisig verify with OP checksigad, tagged hashing for domain separation, extensibility through leaf versions, OP success opcodes, and upgradable pubkey types. As a result of the BIP drafts, the Bitcoin community would then begin reviewing the proposed Taproot upgrades. Throughout Novdeck, reviews of the various Taproot features were undertaken by the core developer community. Through a combination of IRC chats and GitHub commits demonstrating Taproot features and improvements, this process meant BEP Schnorr and BIP Taproot would slowly mature from the draft status to the proposal status. To round out 2019, Vuila gave a presentation on December 17th to summarize the Taproot review group. Out of this came the near settlement of what Taproot involved: masked, Taproot, graftroot, new opcodes, new sci-hash modes, and cross-input aggregation. The Taproot upgrade was now set as one of the biggest releases for Bitcoin Core in 2020. On the 22nd of January 2020, Vuila would provide an implementation of the Schnorr Taproot consensus rules proposed by the following BIPs. BIP 340, BIP Schnorr, was the addition of Schnorr signatures and 32-byte pubkey support to libsec 256K1 subtree. BIP 341, BIP Taproot, would aim at script validation. BIP 342, BIP TapScript, would be script validation under Taproot. BIP 340 is titled Schnorr Signatures for CTP 256K1 and is a proposal of a standard for supporting 64-byte Schnorr signatures over the CCP 256K1 elliptic curve. The proposal mainly defines the Schnorr signature that will be used as well as some definitions around its signing and verification. The proposal also mentions multi-signatures and threshold signatures regarding the way the signature can be applied through Musig. Musig is a protocol for aggregating public keys and signatures as part of the Schnorr digital signature algorithm. Musig allows each distinct user with their own private key, which they can then create a combined public key that's indistinguishable from any other Schnorr signature. Compared to traditional script-based multisig, P2SH, Musig uses less block space and increases privacy. The cost is that more cooperation between the participants of the signature is required. Whereas verifying once required a signature checked each of the signer's public key, Musig allows one joint public key to be used in the verification process. The power of Musig is that it can hide all the information about how many signers were involved in the signature by reducing it down to a single key. BP 341 is titled Taproot, SegWit version 1 spending rules and is concerned with proposing the new SegWit version 1 output type with spending rules based on Taproot, Schnorr signatures and Merkle branches. Taproot spending rules is specifically concerned with limiting the amount of information or spending conditions required when a transaction output is revealed. For example, pre-Taproot scripts like P2SH may provide multiple spending conditions or signers. BP 341 specifically addresses how the new privacy and efficiency gains associated with Taproot work. The proposal also reveals what techniques and added benefits associated with the Taproot spending are enabled to summarize these. Merkle branches, to only reveal the actually executed part of the script to the network. Taproot, an additional bonus, is in merging of the key features associated with pay-to-pubkey and pay-to-script hash. By all parties participating in key aggregation, a public key can be constructed from multiple participant public keys. The public key is directly included in the payment output, whereas earlier iterations stored a hash of the public key or script in the output, these being base 58 address, P2PKH, P2SH. The output is going to have 32-byte pubkey instead of a 20-byte hash of the pubkey. BP 342 is the validation of Taproot scripts through a new scripting language change called TapScript. TapScript is the scripting language that makes Taproot script spending possible. Since all Bitcoin spends are authenticated through the use of a scripting language, the TapScript change was required so that Bitcoin Path spends involving Taproot would be authorized. TapScript shares most operations associated with legacy and SegWit scripting, but has added a few additions. OP check multisig and OP check multisig verify is replaced by OP checksagad opcode. Many previously disabled opcodes are redefined to be OP success opcodes that unconditionally render the entire script valid to simplify soft fork upgrades. Signature hashes are calculated differently than in Legacy Script or BP 143 version 0 SegWit, since these are utilizing Schnorr. With the Taproot upgrade nearing completion, the choice in how best to activate Taproot was the next step in its integration into Bitcoin Core. Activating prior updates or soft forks on the Bitcoin network had been done many times before, but it was the prior SegWit upgrade which had many within the community hoping to not have a repeat of the 2017 upgrade. The controversy around the SegWit upgrade has been well documented by other industry commentators, but was mainly related how many in the community believed that it was a somewhat sacrilegious way to deal with network scaling by changing the block size cap by removing signature data. The Taproot upgrade, by contrast, had a marginally challenging but non-controversial activation since it didn't deal with underlying changing to the Bitcoin network and core code. It was a signature scheme which would still maintain backwards compatibility with ECDSA, so the option to upgrade wouldn't greatly inconvenience any segment of the community, in particular, the miners. The Taproot activation discussion by Bitcoin developers focused on the rules of the activation and how particular occurrences in the network could be used to signal activation. Some of these have included specific BIP releases in order to address and activate soft forks or minor changes. One of these was BIP 8, version bits with lock-in by height, which focused on signaling activation when a specific block height is reached. Block height refers to the number of committed blocks of transactions in the network, blockchain -1. A block height is merely a way of organizing transactions at some point within the network at a particular point in time. For example, Bitcoin halvings occur at very specific block heights, once every 210,000 blocks. BIP 9, version bits with timeout and delay, focuses on using the version field of blocks as a signaling mechanism for upgrades. The version field in a block is 4 bytes long, or 32 bits in length. Since the miners are the ones who generate blocks, then they are actually responsible by providing information within this version field. Some of the earliest Taproot activation proposals focused on scenarios that utilized previously activated soft fork approaches. Some of these included whether miners would implement BIP 8 as a software fork of Bitcoin Core that mandates miners to signal Taproot activation, or whether it should be network nodes to signal activation at a specific block height or time roughly calculated 18 months from now. Both approaches focused on using a variation of BIP 9 or a modification that becomes part of BIP 8. The main difference between these two is median time passed versus height of the current block. Concerns were raised that the proposal was too short-term for its activation scope. As summarized in an IRC chat, Speedy Trial fully prepares for the likely case where miners activate Taproot, but it does nothing to codify lessons learned from SegWit's failure to activate in a timely manner. We have an opportunity with the activation of Taproot to create a template for future activations that will clearly define the roles and responsibilities for developers, miners, merchants, investors, and end users in all the ways an activation can progress, not just the best case outcomes. In particular, enabling and enshrining the final arbiter role held by Bitcoin's economic users. Defining this will only get more difficult in the future, both because we'll only do so when we're already in crisis, and because Bitcoin's growth means future agreement will need to be done at greater scale, and so with greater difficulty. The activation would eventually come to fruition with the version of Bitcoin Core 0, 21.1 in early May of 2021. The description of the Taproot upgrade in the release was described as follows. Activation for Taproot is being managed using a variation of BIP 9 version bits called Speedy Trial, described in BIP 341. Taproot's version bit is bit 2, and nodes will begin tracking which blocks signal support for Taproot at the beginning of the first retarget period after Taproot's start date of the 24th of April 2021. If 90% of blocks within a 2016 block retarget period, about 2 weeks, signal support for Taproot prior to the first retarget period beginning after the time of the 11th of August 2021, the soft fork will be locked in and Taproot will then be active as of block 709632, expected in early or mid-November. Should Taproot not be locked in via Speedy Trial activation, it is expected that a follow-up activation mechanism will be deployed, with changes to address the reasons the Speedy Trial method failed. This release includes the ability to pay Taproot addresses, although payments to such addresses are not secure until Taproot activates. It also includes the ability to relay and mine Taproot transactions after activation. Beyond those two basic capabilities, this release does not include any code that allows anyone to directly use Taproot. The addition of Taproot-related features to Bitcoin Core's wallet is expected in later releases once Taproot activation is assured. All users, businesses, and miners are encouraged to upgrade to this release, or a subsequent compatible release, unless they object to activation of Taproot. If Taproot is locked in, then upgrading before block 709632 is highly recommended to help enforce Taproot's new rules and to avoid the unlikely case of seeing falsely confirmed transactions. It's also worth noting that further concerns were raised over the reasoning behind Taproot's activation, given that few, if any, underlying transactions would begin to even utilize P2TR until it reached more popularity and wallets would implement it. In theory, a user could generate a P2TR address and lock funds to it, but until network consensus activated Taproot, this Bitcoin would not be spendable. At block height 681458, the first miner would signal Taproot readiness by changing the version number in the block header. Setting the 4-byte version number with a trailing 04 was the accepted way for miners to signal their readiness for the Taproot upgrade. For those wanting to track the progress of the Taproot activation, the website taproot.watch showed the Taproot signaling by miners over the last difficulty period. It was then at block height 709,632 that Taproot was activated throughout November 2021. The lead up to this point was fairly predictable, given the majority of miners on the network had signaled readiness for Taproot and that an activation block height could be determined in advance. However, it wasn't all embraced with concerns raised over earlier and later versions of nodes accepting different blocks. Back in 2015, the activation of the BIP66 soft fork resulted in a 6-block chain split and several short chain splits. Thankfully, no problems occurred from the Taproot activation. It wasn't until later at block height 709,635 where the first Taproot transaction would occur, in another milestone moment for the Bitcoin network. Thus, we come to a new address type called Pay to Taproot, P2TR, to generate Taproot-related payment spends. A Taproot address enforces all the previously mentioned improvements associated with the Taproot upgrade around signing improvements, security, and scalability. A P2TR is encoded in a BECH32M address starting with BC1PA, with an arrangement of lowercase characters and letters of length 32. BECH32M addresses were subsequently introduced as part of BIP 350 under the title BEC32M format for V1 plus witness addresses, which, as the description states, is an improved variant of BEC32 called BEC32M and amends BIP 173 to use BEC32M for native segregated witness outputs of version 1 and later. Taproot thus requires BEC32M as its new address format and will gradually increase as more wallet users send to this new format. As of today, the amount of exchanges and wallets supporting implementation of Taproot BEC32M addresses is ever increasing. The future for Taproot is bright. There are many potential use cases around spending conditions and smart contracts that Taproot will enable its users in years to come.